Welcome to the opening line report here on Vegas Insider. Kevin Rogers with you as we look ahead to the divisional playoff round. We're down to 8 teams after the Cowboys beat the Buccaneers on Monday night. The Cowboys will be in Santa Clara coming up on Sunday to take on the 49ers. Also, we'll look at Giants-Eagles Saturday, and then the AFC games. Jaguars-Chiefs Saturday at Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City, and then Sunday the Chiefs or the Bengals and the Bills meet up in Buffalo, and to look at all of the matchups, where the Lions have gone, where they expect to go. Patrick Everson joins us at @PatrickE_Vegas. And Patrick, it's good to have you on again. And before we get to the 4 games coming up this weekend, favorites went 2-4 against the spread this past weekend in the wild card round. Dallas covering easily against Tampa Bay. San Francisco pulled away from Seattle. But kind of odd where you had 2 favorites, 1 and covered, 2 underdogs went outright, and 2 underdogs cover in losses. So what did that mean for the books this past weekend?
Well, it kind of was a really mixed bag, just like the results, Kevin. I was going back and forth with BetMGM's Jason Scott on Sunday night, and he said, hey, here's where we're at heading to Monday night. This is basically a tie. He said, he put it in boxing terms. He said on Saturday, the bettors won on points. On Sunday, the books won on points, and Monday night will decide it all. And he said what they were looking at BetMGM anyway, and this was Sunday night. A lot can change throughout the day Monday, but was a lot of money line parlays running to the Cowboys. So if that was the case, then more than likely, at least BetMGM probably lost by decision last night with the Cowboys running away with that game. But yeah, a mixed bag for the books as well. And even within games, and this just kind of shows you the dynamic of how games can be bet differently with different sportsbook operators, and often are. BetMGM did fantastic to the Jaguars, coming all the way back and winning that game. The Superbook, John Murray told me Sunday morning, we were going to win his exact quote, we were going to win a huge number if the Chargers won and covered all the prospects for the Jags, particularly the Jaguars teasers. So if the Chargers won basically by 8.5 or more, and that seemed like a lead pipe cinch. And he said we were prepared to win a very big number, and he's running all the numbers at halftime when it's 27-7, or maybe it was 27-0, so not quite halftime, and ended up not getting there. So even mixed results within the books on specific games.
Now, what about Saturday? Let's start with that one. Jacksonville and Kansas City, second meeting between these teams this season. The Chiefs, you see they're laying 8.5, total of 53. That's at BetMGM. Kansas City, the number 1 seed, they did not play this past weekend. They had the bye. Jacksonville off the incredible comeback against LA. What are you hearing now with this game, the first matchup?
Right, 8.5, as you noted, and on Sunday night when those numbers first went up, I hit up the Superbook, Casey Degnan at the Superbook, and that was their opening number as well. Hasn't moved off it, so it seems fairly solid at 8.5. And what Casey said was right out of the gate, there was some smaller bets on both sides of the spread, but nothing noteworthy, nothing to move them off the number. And as I said, they're still on 8.5 this morning in Vegas, early afternoon on the East Coast on Tuesday. But he said, look, even if we see some Jacksonville love throughout the week, I expect we'll be rooting for a Jaguars upset victory come Saturday afternoon to kill all the teasers and parlays tied to the Chiefs. He also noted a little bit of a early play on both sides of the total. They were still at 50 and 51.5 as of late Sunday night. But Monday, obviously, things picked up a little bit, maybe even a little bit this morning. This total all the way out to 53 now at the Superbook.
Now, the other thing, too, Patrick, when you look at this matchup, is there any concern with people about the Chiefs maybe rest or rust with them? And remember the last time we saw them in the playoffs against Cincinnati, they jumped out to that big lead. And also on the flip side with Jacksonville, is there any concern there, too, about them having a letdown? Obviously, Kansas City's a better team here, but a letdown after that huge comeback?
Oh, I think those are – nobody's expressed that yet early in the week, but I think those are reasonable concerns on both sides of this game. I don't know how Jacksonville keeps doing this, to be honest. I mean, all credit to them, no question. A huge comeback. They've won several games in a row now. At one point, this team was 2-6, and now it's 10-8. So that's worthy of some respect. They clearly put some things together there, got some things figured out. In many of those games, not exactly against the strongest of opponents. If we go back and look through those, but still, you can only win you only play and win against whoever's put in front of you. And on Saturday against what I think is a reasonably good Chargers team that just has some questionable decisions made a lot. The Jags found a way to overcome a huge deficit, but I would think it seemed, if I'm thinking of this in my terms, I'm thinking there's a letdown coming. But to your point, the Chiefs with the layoff, and you noted what happened last year with the Bengals, got out to a big lead and then didn't get to the finish line. I think it's a reasonable concern on both sides of this game. It'll be interesting to see how some of the sharper players approach this game if they decide to get involved.
What about Kansas City and how bad they've been against the spread? Is that a concern?
Oh, geez. It would be for me. I mean, this team doesn't cover numbers. I believe they were second worst in the league against the number in the regular season, behind only the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So, and we saw what happened to Tampa Bay on Monday night. Kansas City's just been off the 5-11-1 against the number in the regular season or thereabouts. I think there were a couple of games, push win, push cover, push loss. Depending on how you scored it, but basically 5-11-1 against the spread. They've just been terrible against the number all season long. That's the one thing where Kansas City's been really, really consistent. So I'd be worried about that as well. And, and the Jags have won 8 of their last 10 games, 5 in a row. And obviously, covering some numbers in those games as well. So the Jags are certainly the hotter team on the field and at the betting window, no question.
Now let's look to the Saturday evening game in Philadelphia. It's the Giants and the Eagles. Third time around for these two teams. The Eagles ripped up the Giants at MetLife Stadium in the first meeting. Second time, it was Week 18. Brian Daboll sat Daniel Jones, sat some key starters. Game didn't really mean much for the Giants since they were locked in. But New York, though, putting up a great effort on Sunday, winning at Minnesota. And now, again, they're playing with house money at this point, Patrick. I mean, Philadelphia had the great regular season. I know things kind of fell apart at the end when Jalen Hurts was injured and they lost a few games. But are people thinking, with Philadelphia, they get back on the train here, or just ride the Giants at this team? I mean, granted, with Eli Manning in the past, they would get hot in these rounds as underdogs. Now we'll see if they could do it with Daniel Jones.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I've heard from a couple of people that are kind of keen on the Giants, especially at 7.5. Liking getting the hook in that game. And again, to your point, in Week 18, the Giants played a pretty respectable game. They were down 19-0, but they came back and made a game of it and covered a massive number. The Eagles were 16.5 in that game with Jalen Hurts coming back. I wonder if we're going to get, the Eagles that got comfortably ahead in Week 18, had the number 1 seed wrapped up and kind of coasted to the finish line, or if we're going to get the Week 14 Eagles that went to MetLife Stadium and beat the hell out of the Giants 48-22, just went in and trucked them. So, but that's not an easy question to answer. And as you said, the Giants are kind of playing with house money at this point. What Casey Degnan said behind the counter at the Superbook when they opened this, the discussion was whether to open at 7 or 7.5. They went with 7. Now they're at 7.5 as I talked to you on Tuesday. So you can get 7 in the hook at the Superbook, and I assume probably some other shops as well. He said he expects the Eagles to be very popular among both teasers and parlays at that number. And he said also some smaller bets on over 46.5 came in right out of the gate. And that's led them ultimately to adjust all the way up to 48. And we're still very early in the week. But the Giants intrigued me at 7 in the hook, like you said, in Week 18. I mean, the Eagles did have something to play for in that game with the number 1 seed potentially on the line. And, maybe they're kind of eyeballing what was happening down in Washington with the Cowboys that day as well. But, for the Giants, who are resting a ton of players, to get back in that game and easily cover the number, a third time in a division matchup, it just seems like 7 in the hook, you might want to think hard about New York there. And I know, like I said, I've heard a little chatter from a couple of people I respect who definitely are leaning Giants there.
New York is 8-1 against the spread this season, Patrick, away from MetLife Stadium. The only loss came, or the only non-cover came against Seattle. And look, every week it feels like people are denying them or saying that the Giants they're not good enough, this and that. And they keep doing it. And they've won a lot of these games outright, which is very impressive. And I know you got the double revenge spot. Look, the pressure's all in Philadelphia here with all of the with the great start to the season, what the season Jalen Hurts has had, that they're the team supposed to come out of the NFC. I know we'll talk about San Francisco in a little bit and what they've done, but Philadelphia is the team to beat. And the Giants weren't expected to do much. Now they're a win away from the NFC Championship. Do you bet on the team that's got the pressure on them like Philadelphia?
Yeah, I think it would be tough to be unless you're thinking about your money line parlays or your teaser options and that sort of thing. And to your point on that 8-1 away from MetLife for the Giants against the spread, look, they're 14-4 overall against the spread. No, I mean they're 10-7-1 straight up. Look, they got into the playoffs at 9-7-1, which isn't the sexiest record, no question, but they did the job against Minnesota. Could have potentially beaten Minnesota twice to get to double-digit regular season wins. Remember, they lost that game in the regular season on a 61-yard field goal as time expired there. But 14-4 against the number this season. Again, that's number one in the NFL. This team generally is in games. That butt kicking that they took at the hands of the Eagles in Week 14, was the anomaly there. That was not the norm there for them. They were in games. They were winning and covering, or at least covering the number. So I think there's definitely something to like about the Giants' double revenge spot.
Let's go to Sunday now, Patrick, and got this Bengals-Bills game. Obviously, we all know what happened last time they played in Cincinnati and the DeMar Hamlin situation. So really, you can't base anything on the last matchup since the game stopped halfway through the first quarter. And now they're going to play again. And Buffalo at home, even though you can make the argument, we had this potential AFC championship in Atlanta with the Chiefs and Bills. Bengal fans can say, well, if we would have beaten the Bills, we'd have home field advantage, but that's not the case here. So after Buffalo struggled with Miami and with a third-string quarterback in Skylar Thompson, Bills were up 17-0 in that game. Dolphins came back, took the lead. Bills ended up holding them off. Now they get the Bengals, and we know how well Cincinnati has been or how well they played in the playoffs since the beginning of last year. Yeah, they struggled with Baltimore last week. They didn't cover. They needed the defensive touchdown. But this is a very curious game. What are you hearing with this Bills-Bengals game and where the money's going?
Yeah, it's really interesting, a fascinating game, and as you pointed out, all the dynamics of a couple of weeks ago, and now the two teams meet again, but this time in Buffalo. And what I thought was interesting about this is kind of how this started to lay out on Sunday night. It was funny. There was a book or two, I think DraftKings was one of them, that came out at 3.5 at Bills 3.5, and I tweeted it out right away. As soon as numbers started posting. And people are like, oh, you got to take the Bengals 3 in the hook. Can't believe they're giving them the hook. And then you get Circa and Superbook coming out at 4.5 and 5 respectively. And the number moved towards Circa and Superbook, not toward what DraftKings had up at the lower number at 3.5 on the Bills. So I thought that was kind of fascinating that people were on social media were all jumping up and down about getting 3 in the hook, and all of a sudden, well, you could get 4 in the hook, and briefly you could get 5. And granted, 5 is kind of a dead number, but you could have gotten 5 right out of the gate at the Superbook. And like I said, everybody's kind of gravitated that direction. And in fact, the Superbook is back up to its opener at 5 right now as we talk. And again, they opened 5. Pretty quickly went to 4.5, and what Casey said of that on Sunday evening, again, Casey Degnan behind the counter at the Superbook, he said, we took some respected money right away on the Bengals +5, knocking us down to 4.5. He said, it's been all Cincinnati in the early going, but as the week progresses, he said, I'm sure we will see some money backing Buffalo as well. And I don't doubt it, because Buffalo Cincinnati became even as odd as it sounds, a defending AFC champion and a team that was, a possession away from winning the Super Bowl. Was not really a public team this season, but Buffalo's been a public team all season in all ways, week to week on the spread and so forth, and in the futures markets and all that. So the public will definitely be on Buffalo this week, but Cincinnati's made itself a public team by winning so many games this season and by covering at a really consistent basis. 12-3 against the spread in its last 15 games. Obviously did not cover against the Ravens on Sunday night, it could have lost. I mean, obviously could have lost outright. So they really got by the skin of their teeth, but they've been a great spread covering team. So bettors ultimately came around to them. Public bettors came around to them. So I think it'll be interesting to see where this lands, who the book ends up meeting. I got to assume the book's going to need the Bengals here, but I think the Bengals will get their share of play.
What do you think it is where people are maybe they don't have faith in Buffalo because of how things went down the stretch, or like you said, Cincinnati is now becoming a public team because they were in the Super Bowl last year, but they won at Kansas City last year in the AFC Championship. They won at Tennessee as an underdog. And now they're back in the underdog role, and they covered against the Rams as an underdog in the Super Bowl. But do you think people want to ride that? And because Cincinnati has been fantastic against the spread, they just want to blindly bet that? Is that the reasoning? Or they just don't have a lot of faith in Buffalo?
I think it's probably, of those two scenarios, I think it's probably the latter, which is weird to say because Buffalo has been the odds-on Super Bowl favorite much of the season. I think they're back behind Kansas City now as it stands, but number 2 still right there at the top, and have been there all season long. But I think there are just a little creeping doubts about Buffalo. Look, man, Miami's playing Skylar Thompson. When it was 17-0, I don't think anybody was saying, well, I didn't see that coming. I think everybody expected that was to come. And I had Bills first half -7, and I thought that was a pretty good way to go because what I presumed the Bills would really, really want to do is bury them as quickly as possible and start getting key players off the field to keep anybody from getting injured for the second round, for the divisional round. And then and then Allen throws a couple of picks and then they let Miami hang around the entire rest of the way. It was a scratch and claw the whole second half. So I think it's more the latter. I think there just might be a little doubt creeping into people's minds when it comes to betting the Bills on the number here.
What about the total on this game? Any thoughts on that?
Right. So right out of the gate, Casey said that sharp money at the Superbook came in on the over. They opened 49.5, and by Sunday night, literally within an hour or two, they were already up to 50.5. However, this has come the other way, and I haven't checked weather or anything else yet, or double checked on injuries this morning yet. Again, it's Tuesday morning in Vegas as we're talking right now, but it's backed up to 48. So that's kind of interesting. There was an initial boost, initial surge on the over, and I believe Casey said that was sharp money on the over to get to 51.5, and now it's dialed all the way down to 48. So I think that's interesting. I would like I said, I hadn't had a chance to look at the weather yet. Wouldn't be surprised if that's part of the equation there, but it's definitely receded since then.
Now, the final game we'll look at, Patrick, rematch of last year, that wild game in Dallas that the Niners were up big, and then the Cowboys had an opportunity to win at the end, and they had the situation with Dak. They put the ball down, time ran out on them.
Yep.
Look, you got to give the Cowboys a lot of credit. They went into Tampa last night, and granted, the Buccaneers had the worst record of any team in the playoffs. Tom Brady's 45. Cowboys took care of their business, and they ended up winning that game handily. Granted, they missed all those extra points, but still, it was kind of never in doubt. Now they face a San Francisco team that I don't say had a slow start, but Seattle hung for a bit, and then the Niners opened it up in the second half, and now Brock Purdy making his second playoff start with an elite defense, with McCaffrey, with all these weapons he has around him. A lot of star power in this game coming up on Sunday between the Niners and the Cowboys. But what are you hearing with this one? Dallas now flipped to a dog after being favored at Tampa.
Yeah, and again, boy, I don't know if Dallas has a kicking situation to figure out this week or not. I mean, granted, this guy has generally been I heard Scott Van Pelt on SportsCenter last night just reiterate, look, this guy is a really good kicker. He just really got the yips for one game. And it'll be interesting to see how Dallas handles that this week, because I don't think you can have that happen again. And I was just like, oh my God, because I just felt like the noise last night on Tampa was too great. So I took Dallas alternate spread -7.5 just before kickoff, and got there. But as I was watching all these missed extra points, I'm like, I am going to lose this game because of all these missed extra points. Fortunately, I didn't. But what Casey Degnan said of this late last night, they put up a number, as the game ended and so forth. And he said the risk room at the Superbook was the discussion was between 49ers 3 and 49ers 4. So they went ahead and split the difference and opened at 3.5. And he said so far, one-way traffic on the Niners minus the points. Now, as of late last night, he said it was nothing too significant to move us off the opener, but it was definitely one-way traffic on the Niners. They're still 3.5 as I talked to you Tuesday morning here in Vegas, Tuesday afternoon on the East Coast. But he said as the week goes on, I'm sure we will see some money back in Dallas. People are going to remember what they saw last. That always creeps into this equation as well. And what they saw was Dallas, once they got those first 2 drives out of the way, it looked like it was almost like kind of a feeling out process and trying to figure it out. And then they just rolled from there. Casey thinks that the Superbook and perhaps others will end up needing Dallas once you factor in parlays, though. That said, he said it'll be curious to see how the betting plays out and where the line closes on this.
What about with Dallas and them being on the road for a second straight week? You know, people have said that San Francisco has got 2 extra days of rest. They played Saturday. Dallas plays Monday. But again, you're Dallas. You're the Cowboys. You're going to get the prime slot on Monday night. You just got to suck it up. That's just what it is. But now with the short week for the Cowboys, traveling back to Texas, then going out to California, and even the revenge spot from the playoffs last year, Dallas has been very good on the road this year. I know you mentioned San Francisco, people are banging them early, but are we going to see it fall back? You know, people taking Dallas here.
I think we will, as Casey alluded to. He thinks there's going to see some support for Dallas as the week goes on. And again, the recency bias, I think, creeps into it a little bit. And I don't think Dallas is in that bad a spot. It's not like playing a Thursday game. And it's not like traveling way up to the Northeast. I mean, it's not a short trip from Dallas to San Fran, but it's not ridiculous. And again, it's not a short week for Dallas. And I would think with the way that team played on Monday night, they'd be chomping at the bit to just get back on the field. I mean, you want to roll with that. They looked good. So I don't think it'll be as huge a factor. And hopefully we get a pretty entertaining game. Dallas has got obviously a little bit of revenge on his mind. And the way that game ended last year was just, the clock management and all that. Which always comes into play. A lot of those kind of things come into play with Mike McCarthy teams. But I think it will be interesting to see where this line closes. I don't know that I recall last night, I think there were some 4.5s and 4s that were out there very early. Some even before the Cowboys game ended, because it was clear that Dallas was going to win. And so I think there were a couple of numbers floating out there that were like San Francisco 4.5, but it looks like 3.5 is the number now. It'll be interesting to see if it goes up. I would think it would. The Niners are red hot, 11-0 straight up, 9-2 against the spread in their last 11 games. Just absolutely on fire.
Now let's switch over, Patrick, to Super Bowl futures. And you had mentioned Kansas City. They pulled ahead of Buffalo, but also I find it interesting that San Francisco is ahead of Philadelphia now, even though the Eagles have the home field throughout. But what's the latest you've heard with some of those adjustments?
Yeah, it's interesting that you went straight to that point. And Kevin and I, we didn't even discuss this beforehand. We just threw out, hey, maybe we'll talk about this. That's a point that Adam Pullen, who is with Caesar Sports, he's the assistant director of trading for Caesar Sports. And in the article that I wrote last week, I'll update it this week with some fresher numbers. But he addressed that fact with the Eagles being ahead, or rather with the 49ers being ahead of the Eagles in the Super Bowl odds, even though the Eagles have the number 1 seed. And if the two teams were to meet in the NFC Championship game, the game would be in Philadelphia. He said, I wouldn't be too surprised if the 49ers were favored over the Eagles in Philly. So he said he thinks it's closer to a pick'em game than to say Eagles -3. But he noted the Eagles down the stretch had a lot of injuries. And he said, even with some of those players coming back, the 49ers being NFC favorites goes to show you how the 49ers are power rated and how people view them. Now, in addition to that, liability is a factor, Adam said. Remember, this team, I believe preseason, was in that 12-1, like 14-1 range to win the Super Bowl. And then they made the quarterback change, and just before week 1, they decided to go with Trey Lance, and they ballooned out to like 22, 24, 25-1, depending on where you shopped in the Super Bowl. And some bettors jumped on, and then Lance got hurt, and it was still in that 20-1 plus range, even beyond. And then Garoppolo got rolling. So some people got on at some numbers there that were pretty favorable. And then, there was probably a little bit of a favorable spot when Garoppolo got hurt too, thinking, oh goodness, rookie QB, Mr. Irrelevant. There's no way this team can continue to do this. But as Adam said, liability is a factor too. He said the 49ers are the one team we do not want to win the Super Bowl.
Very interesting. And also interesting that the 49ers would be favored at Philadelphia.
Potentially.
Potential. You're right. Potentially, you're right. They still got to play the games, and like a rookie quarterback and Brock Purdy, the guy's the last pick in the draft. He could be a favorite on the road in the NFC Championship, which is unbelievable to think. I mean, obviously, nobody's thinking about it before the season, much less in November or December when the Dolphins played the 49ers out there and Garoppolo got hurt. So it's pretty insane. Really quick, Chiefs Bills. Do you know of any number that would be thrown out there? Obviously, we know it's going to be a neutral site game, but any number you heard with that as a potential matchup?
Boy, I have not. I would assume. Well, hell, I don't know what I'd assume there. I hadn't seen anything on that. Nobody. There were some people kind of speculating on a couple of other games, but that wasn't one of them. That's a really interesting one at a neutral site. The Bills went to Kansas City and won, correct? Earlier this season.
Yes.
So that's a tough one to call. It's going to be a very short number either way, I would assume, especially at a neutral site. The one thing that did come up, and this is again from Adam Pullen at Caesars, is, and this is more related to Super Bowl odds, but it ties right into these two teams potentially playing each other in the AFC Championship game, is the reason they have the Chiefs ahead of the Bills. The Chiefs are number one on the odds board at Caesars. The Bills are number two. Is on the premise of one less game is the easier road. So the Chiefs are getting one less. They got a bye. They got one less game, even though they may have to go play at an alternate site for the AFC Championship game if they face Buffalo. But Adam and the risk team at Caesars just put some stock in the Chiefs getting that one less game, getting time to rest, get their players right. But, well, he did say, he does have it in here. I apologize. He said if they were to meet in the AFC Championship, the Bills would be favored and would be Super Bowl favorites then. He did have that. I didn't realize he had that in his comments that I had in my article up on VegasInsider.com on Super Bowl odds. But he said the Bills were favored in Kansas City earlier in the season. Keep that in mind. They not only won, they were favored in that game. So they for sure would be favorites against them on a neutral site. So I apologize. I didn't realize. Sometimes I have so much stuff, I don't even realize how much good stuff I have. And this is pretty good stuff. It was actually the answer to your question, and I didn't think I had it.
And considering too, I mean, obviously they won this year, but they've lost in the last 2 years in the playoffs. And yes, the games were at Arrowhead. All three were at Arrowhead. And I mean, if you remember a few years ago, I know it's really not relevant now, but Kansas City really took care of Buffalo in Buffalo during the pandemic year, that Monday night, that 5 o'clock game in the rain. So the Chiefs have had the Bills number until this year. And yeah, it'll be just so different seeing a game at a neutral site indoors, with these two high-powered offenses. So it'll be very interesting to see when and if that game, we know when, but if that game ends up getting played. Patrick Everson, you can find him at @PatrickE_Vegas on Twitter. Patrick, tell us what you got this week. Obviously, divisional playoffs, big breakdown.
Right, exactly. All the stuff that you and I discussed is in my article right now on VegasInsider.com. And in addition, just to note that article updates all week long, and I get information from multiple sports books over the course of the week. So you get kind of a variety of insights and comments and opinions and splits on how these games are being bet at different sports books. It's not going to be the same everywhere. And some of the people I get insights from are pretty smart people for sure. There'll be a further Super Bowl odds update this week, now that we've got a couple of teams that are obviously eliminated from the mix and some teams elevating their status a little bit, such as the Cowboys. In addition, a few other things off the football grid. Just recently did an update on March Madness odds, Stanley Cup odds, and NBA Finals odds. Those are all up there at VegasInsider.com. But I'd be remiss if I didn't note, first off, you need to follow Kevin Rogers here at VI Rogers. Does a lot of great stuff for Vegas Insider every day. A lot of great video clips and so forth, and things where you can really get some good information to help you go to the counter and make a smarter wager, make a more informed wager. And everybody else at Vegas Insider. There's a ton of great content up there every day with a whole lot of different sets of fingerprints on them. So again, make sure you check it out for everything. We'll have all things divisional round. There'll be a ton of different articles, some of my stuff, some of Kevin's stuff, some of Joe's stuff. Everybody's going to be in the mix on this, but also everything else, NBA, NHL, college basketball, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on and on. There's a ton of great content, a lot of excellent contributors who can just help you get yourself a little bit more informed, and you go to the counter or through your app and make a more informed wager and hopefully win a few bucks.
Patrick Everson, again, at @PatrickE_Vegas. We'll forgive him for the Broncos jacket today. He's trying to show some support for his team. So we'll see how they do moving forward. If they get Sean Payton or not.
But, gosh, that would be awesome.
Hey, after having Buddy Hackett this past year, you got to hope for any kind of upgrade. So.
Buddy.
Well, that's your guy.
There's a lot of young people who are watching this and they're going to have to go look up who Buddy Hackett is.
Yeah, it was Buddy Hackett could be a better head coach than Nathaniel Hackett for the Broncos. But
anyway,
say it again.
I said it couldn't have been worse. Not much.
But it's okay. You're stuck with Russell Wilson's huge contract, so that's something you have to worry about. Anyway, Patrick, we appreciate it as always, and we'll talk to you next week for the conference championships on Monday.
You betcha. Thanks, Kevin.
All right, that is Patrick Everson. I am Kevin Rogers. Thank you so much for watching this edition of the Opening Line Report right here on Vegas Insider.